Hi there again. Um, uh, yeah, I've been sort of, should I say, taking care of myself today. Or actually, in the beginning, I was on a lecture, the final lecture on the course I'm in, and um, as always, I get quite tired afterwards. But it's and yeah, considering what everything I talked about yesterday, I've been quite calm today. After that, I rested for a while, and then I just because I have this. I always go back to like learning the academic models so that you advance your understanding, your learning knowledge. It's that's my thing really. That's the conclusion I've come to. Is the only thing to do in order to have a positive impact in any way that you want, in whatever way you want to do that. And for me, it's sort of really have a good foundation on what I to understand things in depth. So it should not, as I'm thinking about today, it's important that it's not a substitute for depth, which puts more pressure on the individual to not just only go deep into a topic, but also have depth and don't see everything from one perspective and so forth. But at the same time, that does not mean that you can go with the depth of in any subject, but the most essential ideas you should know for sure. So, but at least in one, or I think it's probably safe to say that it's hard to go in depth in one subject, and it's even harder to get the width to get the academic models in other disciplines as well. So it's like, for example, it's no one can grasp everything that is in mathematics anymore. One last thing a person who did was probably this one, von Neumann, and but that so even that is impossible to go into the real depth and have the width within the academic discipline is even impossible, more or less, today, and that's make things harder because there's so much knowledge and so forth. But so it depends on what you mean with depth. But at least in one academic discipline, someone should be at least quite really deep. But also know about the others as well. And that's, as I said, it's not an easy thing, and I don't claim to. Well, I have somewhat optimistic view of myself in the sense that I actually pursue that, but it's not to say that I'm close to the goal or that I mean, it is a hard journey, and yeah. Anyway, the reason I took out that is because I've been thinking about that today, that that is what I want to do, but considering my state, so to speak, and I don't want to give excuses for sure, and I want to be careful about that. I really thought about what's the rational thing to do here, and I figured that compared to how I felt like, let's see, in the end of last autumn, and I actually realized now that a part of what made me feel quite well, not like amazingly well, but quite well, was because it was on caffeine, and I trapped it up sort of for increasingly, and not that much increasingly, but somewhat, and so that's the bitter pill, to realize that it's always like that when you, like, caffeine is as a drug as many things else, and I'm still on the fence how much it damaged me and so forth, or how negative influence because it's associated with a lot of other things. Like, for example, I've talked about fasting and so forth. Until I was with my parents and other people as relatives during the Christmas holiday, and so I put into practice, like I have done it 3 or 4, maybe 5 weeks, to fast 24 hours once a week. And I don't have a difficulty with that really. It's somewhat boring for a while and so forth, and I've done longer fasts. I've done, I think one time I've done 2, also like 48 hours, and one time 72, and one time I did 4 days. Like actually, in the end of this summer I did that, and I've so, but I still think I will continue to do like once a week, and that could also be part of the problem why I sort of get out of the multiple factors. And I think that caffeine is one thing, especially because there are some, I can't go into everything, but I just know that there's multiple factors that influence me and makes me like, and I think that's a topic that anyone should think about, what affects them positively and negatively. And there's some individual aspect and some are not, some general. And so yeah, but I think I'm on the right track here. But the consequences was that I had to think about that. How do I optimize that, as well as academic models? For example, how much should I prioritize rest, and how much have I to be stoic? And I've come to realize that I have a quite strong sense, a strong inclination, I think that's a word, towards feeling guilt and duty to do the right thing. Or I think I have a really high sense of duty towards myself to do the right thing, and that imposes a guilt as soon as I don't live up to that, and that I have quite high expectations and standards, so to speak, and that pushes me to push myself, and it pushes me to not listen to when things seems to not be as good as they should be. And I like when something feels wrong, and it could be anything. It's sometimes it's good to override it and just push through, because that's just life. But sometimes it seems you can push yourself too hard, or you can do things that are not really good. But it's really hard, a fine line, because it's really easy to, as Charlotte Munger says, slip into sloth and unreliability, basic laziness, and it's easy for me to find an argument for doing things that are not like. But so it's hard for me to navigate that, because I know that even though I have this high sense of duty and get some sort of guilt, I have more emphasis on duty though, because I seem always, when I get like sense of guilt, I always do what the guilt tells me to do, so I'm not stuck in that and blind to just push it down and living with the guilt and ignore what it's telling me. I actually approach it, and so I lose the sense of guilt, because I always do what I feel that I have to do, the duty towards myself to do. So I'm not like walking around with a sense of guilt in that sense, but since I have so high, I don't know, standards, I think that's the word, so high standards to live up to, it always comes back to you're not doing that right. So the guilts come again, even though I'm approaching and try to solve it, and that ends up in so, and I was about to connect that to something else, But that is not to say that I have blind spots and things that I ignore and get around. And so some of my standards are, well, it could be the case that I don't think that I have sort of, there is something like, for example, social initiatives. It's something that's so, but that's something I'm aware of. So it's not a blind spot in the sense that I'm not aware of it. Because if I'm not aware of it, I can't get the sense of, it's not a standard, and I can't get a sense of guilt or duty, despite, even though it's something that I'm lacking. But that's not the case for social initiatives, because there, on that point, I'm more like, I don't know what's right. I know about the problem, or the potential problem of not engaging in it too much, but because that's just how I am, I naturally don't strive for it or do it, but I'm not convicted that it is the right thing to do all the time, and that's the issue with that. But so what I wanted to say was, when I said that I'm not, I picture up the pictures saying I have high standards, and I try to follow them. That is not to say that all my standards, I have high standards in everything, because some things I don't have standards for because I'm not aware of it as being important. But the social thing is in the middle spot there, because that's something I'm aware of potentially being good, but I'm not sure how good it really is. For sure there's utility in it, I'm not doubting that, but it's opportunity cost, and it depends on how you're socially interacting with, and how constructively, and how much that is for the benefit of the world and yourself, and in the world. When I say within myself, I mean how it's contributing to my ability to contribute. But for sure there's some self-serving bias there too. But yeah. So it's standards that you have and you're aware of, and there are topics that you're aware of but not sure what should be the standard, and there are things that are totally blind to you. And that was what I wanted to bring up, so things that I'm totally blind about, because I don't want to come off as someone who thinks that I have, to say that you have high standards is kind of cocky in some ways, I think. But I think I do have that. But as I said, that is not the same thing as, because I do according to what my standard says oftentimes, or really frequently. It's as to say I'm perfect and doing everything right, but I'm very good at the part of doing what my standards tells me to do, but I'm not good at necessarily to pick out the right standards, because I don't know what they are. I just ramp them up and push high pressure on myself. And one of these standards, so to speak, is, you could have standards about many things, and actually, just to be clear about it, when I talk about standards, it's just something that happened to come to mind. I'm not usually resonating in those words, but it's, of course, the concepts of, if you use another word, you just said doing what's right, or something is, and do what's rational, but I'm just saying that it is not something that I never talked about it. I just figured out that was the word for it. But not, I thought it was interesting to point that out, that everything I say here is not really making things up. Misunderstand me right. I'm making things up when I'm talking about it. It's not like I think of myself as someone with standards, and that's just something I happened to pop up in my brain that I've heard of long ago. But anyway, and it's really conflicting standards that is the issue, or conflicting, like, for example, how much should I push myself is the rational thing to push harder when, like, if you have high standards, but as I've done, developed a new standard, which is, in the long run, you might be worse off, and really civilization might be worse off in the means that you contribute to some degree. Might be worse off if you follow your other standards slavishly, so to speak. So that gives you another standard, which is taking into consideration how your body and mind are affected by doing what's right all the time. But I also think it's, as I said, it's really, really careful, because I don't want to be someone who find excuses for not doing what's right. But yeah. So anyway, there's several things I want to bring up. One thing is, like, this wasn't, like, just consider a rational decision. Was it the right thing to do today, to go through the lecture in the course? That's something I take for given earlier, but then I says that the reason I did was not because it was a rational decision, it's what biases influenced me, but at the same time it could have been the right decision, rational decision that I'm not sure about. And I started to think about that actually just before I went to it. Should I really do? And I get some arguments against, and then I get some rational arguments for it. So, and I decided to go, but now afterwards I critically thought about it just for a second, and I thought, well, it might have been, it would have been more rational to not go. So that's one thing I might explore. But the other thing that I thought about was that, going deeper into what's rational when it comes to rest and so forth, what I did today was that I come to learn how I feel when something is wrong, and I decided, and so really what I want to investigate here is, did I do the right choice? So first of the lecture, that's one thing, then afterward, did I do the right choice? Resting after that, because first I picked up my sort of principles of economics and tried to study and so forth, but I figured, well, maybe I should I really thought, is it rational to rest here just 5 minutes? And then I started to do that, and while I did that, I just felt so right. I was really tired, and so that's the thing. And I've come to the conclusion earlier that when I feel like tired, usually if I push through that, it gets worse during the day. So, like, for example, when I did take a rest, I after a while started to, I don't know how long I lay there. I think it was maybe 40 minutes, something like that, maybe 50. I don't know really, but something like that. And then I successively, I never really felt like going up, but I started somewhat and just listened to what my body responds in it. And if I really had the thought that when I'm starting to sit up, this is really in detail, but if I then feel like, no, I want to get back, then I should. But actually I did not. And I have something. This one, he wanted to get his food because he hadn't, so that was an incentive to get up actually. But at the same time, I felt sort of okay getting up. And it's often time when you're asleep, and if you're just putting the lights on and so forth, it gets somewhat easier. It's somewhat similar to that, but even then you usually want to get back. But this was not the case exactly. I was reasonably recharged, and so this is quite in-depth or detailed of how I handled that rest. And what might be like special when you hear this is maybe that you think that I'm taking resting really seriously, and but I actually can't know. But for most people, I think that pushing through is the rational thing to just do, and for me, yes. And so it's sort of conflicting. I say that I have a high sense of doing the right thing, but how could it really be the sense that you should rest like 40 to 50 minutes and then feel if it's right afterward? Isn't it clear that, well, that's well enough? That's at least what I think that people might respond. And, well, this it's impossible to avoid this topic now when I'm raising it, but I think it depends on how much you pushed yourself before, because there is, as I've said, there are implications for pushing yourself really fucking hard. There is, and it's. But I also think that people who have, as I said, I always try to find if there's a counter argument here, and it is still true that self-serving bias of pure laziness will tell you, well, since you've pushed yourself so hard, you should rest a bit. But since I've read that sort of the really bad things happen when you stress a lot, I come to more skeptical of this. Like, that was so deeply ingrained in me that whatever failure you have, or whatever, it doesn't matter on what level you are. The only reason that you're not better is because you're not push yourself. So I had up to a point in life, I think I might have mentioned it earlier, that I really reasoned about, is there a limit to accomplishments? And I figured no, it's only about how hard you push yourself. So, and I put that concept to the limit in order to sort of see if it holds. And I thought, well, can a high jumper jump 200 meters? That's sort of absurd. It's like, well, it's 100 times whatever, almost, or not almost 100 times what someone have done today. And it is absurd, 200 meters in high jump. But I actually went so far as to say that, yeah, the only reason that that's not happening is because we're evolutionarily programmed to think that's impossible. And that's sort of absurd. That's not realistic to say. And it's, yeah. And so I said to myself, if that's the only reason someone is not doing it, and it could be applied to anything really, running, or is because you're not decisive enough to push through that, and it's sort of absurd. But I for some reason I reasoned like that, and it gave me motivation really to just, and sort of equivalent way of thinking about it was that if you push yourself really, really hard, I mean, it could be anyone's measure of hard. It's subjective, but it's still like, yeah, like really hard pain. Like, for example, when you're running, and if you push yourself really, really, really hard, and then suppose that you something makes you just push 20% harder, which is like a lot when you're on that high level of pain. 20% harder. That's intense. After that, the case is that you still have the option of going even further than that. So it doesn't matter how hard you're pushing yourself, how much pain you're taking on, there's always the possibility of pushing even harder than that. And even when you've done that again, you you can still push harder. So if you have a model that I had in my head, which was that the harder you push yourself, the more successful or the better you will accomplish, it only became a reference towards pushing harder and pushing harder. And the question is, if you have that mentality, you start to realize that, or at least if you don't take pain as a signal of, if you always see pain as something to be overcome, you start to, because the counter question really is that the only thing that matters? Or is it something else? And well, in some sense there is something else, because that's a really simple way of viewing the world. I mean, to be rational is superior to that in my view. Not in moral, but in, well, maybe in moral too, but being rational gives you the ability to think that, considering what you want to achieve, is pushing hard the only thing that is the right thing to do? And the answer is, as we find in many topics, no, that's not the only answer. Like, pushing hard is an important part, but it's not hard to know how much to apply it, and it's hard to know what the consequences are of pushing hard later on, and so forth. So, and one example is that we know that, for example, athletes who push themselves really hard and don't take in consideration to rest and recovery don't do as well as those who do. So that's something like, it's not only about pushing. And the same thing with sleep sometimes. I think that's quite a good consensus, though. I mentioned it yesterday, that it is probably a good thing to think about sleep, because if you just cut it down, like, then you could say, okay, you don't need, it's the same, those who say you don't need that much sleep, you don't like 5-6 hours, yeah, sure, but the continuing of that's a sort of stoic mindset to say, well, you don't need that gets broken down really when you respond to them. Then why do you sleep at all? Cut it down to not 5 hours to 1 hour, or maybe 1 minute a day. And that's really the thing about pushing. It's the equivalent of like pushing yourself in athletics or in studying or whatever it is. There's a limit to how much you should just do, and you have to have a much more rational thought process about the whole thing. And so, and the reason I've talked about this is partly because I think it's embarrassing for me to think about not pushing harder, because it's so deeply ingrained in me, so I don't want to be interpreted. It's not a calculated response, it's just emotional. I think I'm afraid to be perceived as someone who's not. But even more than that, it is also for me hard to rationalize not pushing, because I sort of get this sense of guilt of not pushing, like, for example, doing academic models. And what I came to the conclusion of when I think it was before Christmas, which was that, well, I should do academic models. I've been neglecting it. That was rational. I still agree with that, but it depends on your state and where you are. And considering as I said, it's something I really sort of avoided earlier, but I've alluded to it somewhat, that considering that I had that mentality, it pushed me to a state that I somewhat regret, because I've sensed that if I'm not careful, I come to a state of not being that productive. It's just completely tired all the time and not wanting to do anything really. So there are consequences of stressing and pushing yourself too hard. There really is. And yeah, for me it's might be somewhat different than the usual case, because I had something that built me up, that allowed me to go quite far. I did meditation, and I did exercise, two things that we know reduces stress and makes you calmer, makes you more resilient, really, to push harder and things. And it but it's still the case. Even if you do those things, you can still push harder and harder. So it's really like it doesn't matter if you if you 10x your recovery rate, sort of, or resilience. Well, if you do that, and simultaneously 20x you're pushing yourself, it says itself, like there is still a limit for how much you can, if you do everything right. And yeah, but sort of I think the implications of pushing yourself is different depending on if you're doing things right but still pushes even further, or if you've not done things right and pushes quite hard still. It's so yeah. But anyway, I've come to the conclusion to listen somewhat more, and but also to sense when it's time to, yeah, well, I don't know how to get, but my conclusion is probably that, even though I'm not going that deep into it now, but I probably did the right thing to rest, because I get somewhat productive afterwards. I did question, however, that I did question the thought that what was I about to say? Sorry. Like after that, I've thought about continuing, but I thought that considering that it's somewhat hard to get back to the state that I want to be in, at least not in this, because it's just not only what happens these days, continually over days or months or weeks, that a state is produced, sort of. So I wanted to get back, and so I decided not to push myself towards that, because I had sort of quite negative, because that's the difficult part, because positive feelings seems to have a good impact on recovery and so forth, and pushing yourself seems to have negative. So should you just be in pleasurable state all the time? It's certainly the case that it's somewhat impossible to achieve, but then I get the motivation to just read some history and so on, and I thought, well, if I'm motivated to do it and it's still quite productive, I do it, even though I think the best thing would have been to do academic models of economics if I had been at the right stage, so to speak. But considering I had a motivation towards one and not the other, it was history in this time, and so then I did that instead, because good feelings have a positive influence on the recovery, both like physical and mental, I guess. And so, and after that, I played some guitar before, I think, and now I'm not really done. I think I just not done that much except starting this video again. So, and I'm actually confident that I did the right thing, and the course, the lecture, I'm not sure that as I said, considering that it takes time, and to be honest, like one thing that implicated me, and just put this really short, when I was in school, I have a sort of quite high sense of guilt and was quite stressed about the grades and so forth, and I really pushed hard and accomplished quite good or good. But so when we got some response for a midterm assignment or essay, really, for 40% for the grade, I get some response which I usually don't get when you're on the university level. I just get, well, good, or something like that, really good, but nothing more. This time I got some, and I don't like to brag about not putting much time, but I consider, since I don't not have the courses as my main interest, I try to just do them as good as fast as possible, but still good enough. So I did not put as much time as I maybe would have if I had prioritized it better. And so I didn't get an awesome, I was really close to get a really good grade, really like highest, but he has had some opinions and some critique. And so first off, I just continued my old process of like feeling bad and thinking what's wrong and so forth. And then it appeared to me really yesterday that for some days, even though I tried to reframe it and understand this reaction is somewhat not, I have a much better way to handling it now and not get as frustrated as back then. It was still quite large negative influence on me to get that critique. But then I realized after a while that, well, the reason I'm getting upset is not really upset, it's just a negative feeling, but it was because I had the expectation, really, sort of subconsciously, that sort of his critique I associated with something that he should have done. But the thing is, I did a rational decision of not putting much effort to it, because I don't think, considering the opportunity cost, so I was aware, I thought myself this could be an A or an E, like maybe an F, who knows. And if I then get a B plus, which is essentially what I get, really close to A, and a lot of critique, I felt as if I should have done these things right. But, and I've been thinking about this back and forth sometimes too, that, well, if I do a course, I should take that seriously and really do it really well. And yeah, there are some arguments for that, and I've gone back and forth on that, because sometimes I just take courses to continue my studying, keep in my apartment and so forth, and take things I'm somewhat interested in. But yeah, maybe I'll reevaluate that. But anyway, so it was actually a good thing that I didn't get an A, because if I had, it could be an indication that I wasted too much time on a course that wasn't as valuable as the other things that I do during my day. So it's a really weird rationalization for getting a bad grade, but yeah, I'm not sure that I wanted to put more. And if it really sounds to me like this could really sound as if I'm rationalizing things, but like, yeah, I think it's, well, I don't give up if what do you think about this? I'm quite sure myself that I did not want to I'm really sure that prioritizing that course was not necessarily the thing that I had to do. And the critique that I got is based on the assumption to take on that critique. Well, sure, you could take it on and contemplate it, but seeing the critique as a manifestation of you not, you should have put more effort into your paper. That's not necessarily the case. It could be the case, as I said, but engaging in the courses I take is the right thing to do. But since I've not been able to rationalize that sufficiently, I can't be sure that that's the case. And I have a feeling, I have not come to a perfect conclusion, but I have a feeling, the tendency towards that other things are more important. So, and that's based on that, it is not the best thing to. But to be honest, I have somewhat a motivation to write a better final paper, just because, yeah, if I can find something that's really interesting, I might do that. But that's only if I feel that the time available is enough, if I am quite sharp and feel well rested and so forth, and if that feels right and the topic is interesting, I will make an effort, and then I will take like critique more seriously, or what should I say? I should be more troubled about the critique. But even if that happens, it's hard to say what's. But anyway, that's not I'm getting into subjects here. Just to. But I think I'm accurate to say that I need rest. Actually, I'm tired again now when I'm speaking, and it's not usually. I don't get tired this fast usually. There is something that's not as it should be, and I have to think about what's the reason to it. But yeah, I think I will stop here, and see you next time.